everyone. We are Nature's Playbook. I am Jen Leggett, the co-founder, and I am here with Grace Dwyer, who is our environmental consultant. And we have a special guest here today, and I'm going to let Grace introduce you to her.
So we are interviewing Vivian Thorbeck. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about her profession, and we're going to ask her a few questions about nature and the impact that nature can have on our mental well-being. So to start, can you tell us what you do professionally?
Definitely. Thanks for having me. So, like you said, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I currently work for the County of San Diego. I work at an inpatient psychiatric facility, and I also see some clients individually in private practice on the side. All different types of therapy, so I'm excited to talk a little bit about this.
How would you describe the current mental state of the general public, especially in the light of recent events and social pressures?
When you were asking that question, I took a deep breath because it's such a multifaceted question that has such a huge answer, but I'll do my best to summarize. But I would say the current mental state of our, I guess, general public, it varies. I think that there's so many stressors that we're experiencing, whether that's in your own bubble, in your home, or whether that's worldwide. I think all of that plays a part in what we do and how we interact with others. Obviously, as everyone knows, coming off of COVID, we've had such a big change, and it's just a different way that we're figuring out how to relate to people and kind of pick that back up. To go further into that, obviously, the impact it had on children and their lack of socialization and those type of things. But all in all, I think it's also an exciting time for the mental state of our general public because there's so many more resources that are popping up. There's so many therapists, and I think that there's a lot of ways that we can kind of combat some of those bigger stressors that we're hearing.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
A quick detour, but so would you say that the field is like growing? Would you see more therapists are going into this profession?
I would say so. I mean, I guess most of my information on that is statewide, I would say. I don't know a ton about, can't really speak to the other states and their, the increase in their services. But I would say in terms of what people have access to here, there's a lot of therapists and that are now more accessible even after COVID, with telehealth and things that we've changed. And things that we've tried to do to help people have better access to services. So I would definitely say it's always a growing field, but there's just so many facets of it that it's hard to quantify.
Interesting. And so do you think that it's becoming more accessible because we have decided to prioritize it, or because we've made it easier with like telehealth and I don't know, we've actually figured out how to do that?
Sure. That's a good question. I would say it's prioritized in certain ways. I think that we still, as a society, struggle to prioritize services and therapeutic services for certain, I guess, people in certain social locations and, the access they have to services. So I would say that that is different, but I would say that there's a lot of I guess, drive that I can tell behind the profession. Like a lot of therapists are really ready to help and to support. So I hope that it'll continue to have more services and more availability, as well as I do think we've also made it more accessible.
How can connecting with nature positively impact one's mental health and, in general, their well-being?
Definitely. I think that again is layered. I think that what we miss a lot in terms of the connections we have with people is a lot of it happens within our work situations, within our passing, or we're going to run errands, and all those things are all great. But I think that we miss a little bit of the connection with other people that we used to do in nature that we don't do as much anymore, just because our lives are, in general, obviously speaking in general, but feel a lot busier, and it feels harder to prioritize some of those things. But nature can definitely have a huge impact on mental health and, on the technique that we normally call grounding, which I can speak more to, but that's huge in mental health and just a good way to slow down and take a breath.
What are some of the like common needs and challenges that individuals are facing in terms of mental well-being today?
Um, I would say in general, a little bit about what I spoke to earlier, that some people have difficulty accessing services. They are out there. In more specifics, obviously things like insurance, things like time. I know in my private practice, I see clients in the evening after work, and that's the most desired time, obviously, because a lot of people are working during the day and don't have the time. So the accessibility, I guess, of time for sessions, and then yeah, obviously things like insurance, our current system doesn't really support very well. And at the end of the day, therapy is expensive if you're paying out of pocket. And it's such a tricky balance because a lot of therapists provide great work and they want to make sure that they are paid accordingly, but we don't have a good setup to support people to pay those things put those things out of pocket.
Absolutely. Going back to kind of like the first question, do you think that that's going to improve now that it's more accessible? Like we are actively working on making it more accessible for people. Do you think insurance is just kind of lagging behind in that?
That's a great question. I won't get on my soapbox about it, but I would definitely say it's lacking, and it's with a lot of other medical needs, that insurance can provide. It's just lacking. It's difficult. The other issue that we run into with therapy in terms of insurance is they really want to be able to have insurance pay for therapy. You have to have a diagnosis attached to the services.
I did not know that.
And a diagnosis can either, it's double-sided, right? It can be really great. Someone can really own it and learn a lot about themselves. And I would say in other ways, some people don't want it, and that's okay. And I would say at the end of the day, a diagnosis is something that we made up too, right? And we're putting these labels on people. So in general, insurance wants a diagnosis for those type of things.
That is so fascinating to me, especially just in this current society that we're living in. It's like we all just survived a global pandemic. So I feel like that alone, quite a few things that we're still recovering from.
Exactly. So if you're paying out of pocket, you have more flexibility in that as a provider. If you have a client who's paying out of pocket, the issue with insurance is they are measuring improvement in ways that it's difficult for therapy to measure because you're dealing with humans instead of, in some ways in medical terms, oh, this gets better, and you can see it in the labs or you can see it in blah, blah, blah. For therapists, we are able to see it in our sessions, but then to have that translate to insurance is difficult.
Yeah, that's how I survived.
Definitely. I think was such a double-edged sword for the population. I think that the people who had access to and the time to invest in nature, I think that was huge, and that was such a healing thing for a lot of people. I mean, even getting out of the house was such a big thing for a while there. I do think that those who then had to, work extra or really had, experienced more of those types of struggles during COVID, really missed out on the nature part of it and really getting out and seeing their community and things like that because they were just so in the middle of the global pandemic. Not that those other people weren't, but they might have had access to a little bit more time or energy to put into nature. But I think it was huge. It was so helpful for people to get out and hike, and obviously for their health to kind of just be outside and, have space from people, but also to remember that this time is really hard, but there's so many cool things out there, and we gotta keep remembering that those things are there and we can access them and we don't have to be stuck.
Yes, there was a period of time when trails were closed and parks and whatnot, and people were like just making up for it by just going on the sidewalks and the streets, and like you could just tell people who had access to it were just doing whatever they could to like go outside. But people who lived in cities, especially New York City, and had a lot more limited access.
And I remember when at one point they closed the beaches. And I was like, I never thought that would happen.
Oh wow, I forgot about that.
And it was just for a short amount of time, but even, obviously the health concerns aside, like some people really, that's like their thing, right? They want to go every day, or that's really where they go. And along with other parts of nature, but that was really difficult for people.
Yeah, I just had a memory recall of wearing masks to the beach that summer, being just so scared and unsure, and but like we were just like, we have to go out, get outside and go swimming, and wow.
I remember my daughter, who lives in Hawaii, going to the beach with some friends, and they had trails closed and that sort of thing. But if you exceeded, I think 5 people, you were fined.
Right. Yeah.
So it wasn't just that, it was like, now you could be fined for being outside.
Sure.
It's really bizarre. So I'm gonna go ahead and dive into my next question. Is, are there any specific nature-based or related activities that you know of that you've seen to help people, and what might that look like?
Sure. It's interesting because, and I won't dive too deep into this, but with therapy, they have things called evidence-based therapies. So those are things that, like I said, are easier to measure, things like cognitive behavioral therapy, things like that. The therapies that focus a lot heavily or a lot more heavily on nature don't fall into that category because they can't be measured in the same way that our society asks them to be measured. So at least in my practice, no matter what therapeutic modality I'm using, I'm trying to incorporate some type of nature in some way. So there's interventions that I can pull that other clients have really liked, or that I know are helpful for even certain diagnoses like anxiety or depression, things like that, that I can pull in. So I was doing this with a patient today at the hospital. He was sitting in the grass outside in the sun, and so I went out and sat with him, and I did a grounding technique with him, just taught it to him really quick. And some of the patients at the psych hospital have more limited understanding of these things, so it's normally just a quick intervention, but we do the 5 senses grounding technique, which is great to do in nature. You can actually do it anywhere, even inside. Yeah, totally. Yeah, so you can even do it inside. You can do it in your room if you want to. It's more those ways it's used for anxiety, to ground someone, because that's how it started, I guess I would say, that technique, because people who have anxiety tend to spiral in their mind, all those type of things, the worry, and it kind of brings you back to sometimes literally the ground. So with him, we did the 5 senses technique. So you're just sitting there and you kind of just like put your feet or hands down or whatever, and you use your 5 senses. At the end of it, whichever way you want to do it, you want to choose the same thing every time. So you want to make sure that you assign the same sense to the same number every time, because then it's easier to access. It becomes a habit. So you want to assign one of the senses to the 5 things. So if, let's say, you're saying, so this today with this client, he was sitting on the grass and he was like picking at the grass. I was like, oh, you're, doing something with your hands, but you don't really think about it. So what you're doing is you're naming the things you're doing so that it gets you out of your head and into your body, which is great in nature. So when you're hiking or walking around, you're thinking, oh, what are 5 things I can see around here? And even saying them out loud is more impactful sometimes than just in your head. So yeah, 5 things I can see. Okay, 4 things I can touch, and that could be my shoes, my socks, right? That could be maybe if I take my shoes off the grass I'm standing on. 3 things I can hear. Oh, there's a bird, or oh, I heard a car drive by. And then, 2 things you can smell, if that's what it is, and maybe the trees or the fresh air. And then 1 thing you can taste, which might have been, I don't know, the water you drank or the snack you just had. And it seems so simple, but it brings you back. In its core, basically, it's regulating your nervous system, because when you're all up here, your nervous system is not being accessed. So when you ground yourself, especially in nature, your nervous system is then calming in response to that. So
that's so fascinating, and that's what I and a lot of people do with kids. And this entire time, I thought it was just a distraction, and now I'm realizing that there's actually a connection to it. So that is fascinating. Yeah. And I'll have to incorporate some of those other senses. Usually you go with what can you see, what can you. Oh, that is so interesting. Yeah. I have never heard of that before, but that makes a lot of sense. And then I do it mentally, just
right,
and talking out loud, what am I feeling right now?
Yes. Yep. Oh, no, exactly, wow. Exactly. And if you get as far as 5 things you can see, that's a win. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. It could be whatever you have time and space to do.
we always think of to get out in nature, but does it help to actually physically get out of a certain space that you're in? Like if you're upset or have anxiety or whatever is going on, does it help to just change your view?
Sure, yeah. I With all therapeutic interventions, the caveat that I like to work from is if it works for you, then it works for you, right? So if it works for somebody, I would say most of the time, yes, getting out of where you're currently at is going to be helpful because where you're currently at is what's tied to sometimes where you are mentally, even if you don't realize it. So even if you just change rooms or you go from inside to outside, like you have to also use basically walking and things in that are really grounding that you don't think you're doing every day. So you're moving your body, you're getting out of that space. Moving your body can also be something that then gets you out of where you're at mentally, right?
Okay, so we're back because we ran out of storage. You can believe it. And I want to point out this little white thing is because we lost a little black damper that helps. So, anyways, that's why we have this. Um, so, so Vivian, I think it's super interesting that people there are triggers, and that can affect the state of your mental health because especially if you have existing sort of things that are ongoing, it can pull you into a certain um, mindset, we'll say. Um, and I think there could be also triggers that could be good if you can figure out how to, like you were talking about, the grounding. So that's an amazing thing to have on hand, a tool, right? Um, but if you're doing that, or you're out in nature, you're going on a walk, or you're walking barefoot in the grass, the things that are helping you, can those become actually good triggers if you use them often enough? Or how does that work? How could that work?
Definitely. I think that with all those techniques and all the things, a lot of things that we learn in therapy and that we collaborate on in therapy, the biggest thing that's going to make it useful is using them when you don't necessarily need them, for lack of a better term. So we are thinking, okay, we're getting triggered. Maybe we're feeling overwhelmed or stressed or anxious. I need to go for a walk, for example. But if we are feeling that way, it is very hard to think, okay, now I have to go for a walk to help fix this, quote unquote. So the goal with therapy is we practice these techniques, these things beforehand when we're feeling good. So a habit is much easier to do when you're having difficult feelings if you've practiced them when you have easy feelings or easier feelings. So try to get out for a walk when you're like, oh, it's a beautiful day. I feel great. Let's go for a walk, And then maybe the next day it's a little bit harder and you're like, yesterday I went on that walk and it was nice. I think I'll go on that walk again. That's huge. And that could be with any coping skill. Even the grounding techniques, we practice them when we're feeling good. And it feels kind of strange and weird, but that's easier than to access when we're not feeling so great. And exactly, if we're also going on walks, like you said, and for example, and then we're triggering good feelings too, right? And then we're kind of accessing back those things that we had felt before, and now we're on a walk, and now we're like, oh yeah, last time I did this, I felt pretty good. Let's get there again.
Yeah. So you kind of already know that puts you in a good mood or a good place mentally. And so then when you're in a more challenging spot, you're like, okay, what's something I can do to help myself get back there? And then you're like, oh, okay, that walk is exactly what I do.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, no wonder we feel so good when we're out in nature because our senses are activated more, and sometimes whether it's we're walking up, we're hiking up a hill, or we're running, or we're swimming. I mean, it's things that we see and that we feel and hear, but even like our breath, kind of like if we have to work towards something,
Exactly.
is
Yeah.
it's a great thing, when we it comes full circle. And we always hear about 10,000 steps a day, and 10,000 steps a day is supposed to be sort of a goal, and that could just be a kind of a range, right?
Sure.
For our overall health. And But how can this apply for mental health? And I'm not saying 10,000 steps,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe the frequency or the duration that you're
Mm-hmm.
outside.
It depends. I think, again, it's a hard thing to research because you are researching, how good people feel after it, and that's hard to quantify. What I normally do with clients is what you have the ability to do and what feels good for you is what's our goal, right? So let's say you have like an open day, maybe it's the weekend, and you're like, oh, okay, I don't have much planned today. Let's gonna get out and do a hike, right? That's gonna feel great. Maybe then we get to Tuesday and we have to work however long a shift is, and it's dark outside when you get home, and you don't have access to nature in the same way. At that day, maybe the best you can do is drive home with the window down. Maybe that it seems simple, but maybe that's the best you could do. Maybe the best you could do is, go in your backyard while you're scrolling or something like that, right? Like it's trying to fit it in ways that is helpful for you. And some people then do, if they're really committed and they really think that, really feel, I should say, that things are helpful for them. Like there's some people who, love to run in the morning, and they will wake up really early to make sure they can do that even on a busy day. But if that's not feasible, that's okay. We wanted to choose the amount of nature for you that you think is doable and that's helpful. So sometimes you do have to recognize that do have to push yourself a little bit, right? Like if you have many days where it's not doable, maybe that's too much. Like, spend a few days. Maybe I should try to, wake up 5 minutes earlier and sit outside with my coffee or something like that. And then on those days when you do have time to really invest into nature. So I wouldn't say, and I guess from what I know of all the research, there isn't necessarily a this is going to lead to better, but it's really personal.
From what I gather that you're saying in general is if you have the habits that are
Mm-hmm.
helping you and you stick to those habits,
Mm-hmm.
they will help you as far as going for that morning jog, if that's something that you incorporate in, or if it's maybe you want to listen to music or a podcast and you just want to go on a walk outside, or but whatever those habits are, if you kind of keep them up, that they generally, it's better to do that, to repeat that, than to think of it when you're in a space that's not a good mental space, than to try to
Correct.
go there.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Right. Definitely. It's always better to try it if you have the time and space and to build that habit, like you said, than not.
Let's see, I think we touched on this a little bit, but maybe go a little bit more in depth on just like what are the barriers and challenges that some individuals encounter when trying to connect with nature for mental health purposes, and what you guys do to try and address that.
Sure. I think that it's such a spectrum of availability that people have to interact with nature. I think that it's I think it is more naive for us to not acknowledge that it is a privilege to be able to access nature and be able to have time.
Being in San Diego, the weather is
exactly. Where you live is a huge part of that. But also the time you have, like how much you have to work and how many responsibilities you have, and
is it daylight savings and you get home from work and it is dark already?
Totally, yeah. And I think those things can be barriers, and especially some clients I work with, they're just surviving. Like this is all they have space and time for, which is work and maybe kids and bills and whatnot. And the access to thinking like, okay, now I'm going to have time to go on a walk. This isn't feasible. So it's such a privilege to have the time and space. And most nature, I guess, is also free, but sometimes money, right? Getting in a car, driving somewhere.
National parks are not inexpensive.
Totally, yeah.
State beach parking. Yeah, I can add up.
For sure. Exactly. And especially if you live far away from those places.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think that that's a huge thing to acknowledge, that it is a privilege to access some of these things. But that being said, there are small ways that you can change your day to day, your habits, to access them in different ways. I wouldn't even say smaller, because they could be just as significant to somebody if they are able to, I don't know, drive home with the window open and get some fresh air, versus someone who's going out for a hike. Maybe those things, they feel different, but maybe they feel just as satisfying to those people comparatively. So yeah, I think those are some of the biggest barriers to accessing that. And then also for people to, I mean, I think we'll get into this a little bit, but technology is so great in connecting us with it, but it's also can be limiting, and we can kind of turn to it without thinking, oh, maybe I should do this nature thing first. So I think there's different barriers that we can really.
Do you have any people who are like triggered or like sensory issues with being outside, where that's just like not helpful, or it's not something that, I don't know.
It's a fair question. It's interesting because, I mean, I can only speak to the experiences I've had with my clients, but there are some ways that people do carry triggers with nature, or maybe they've experienced something in nature or in doing so that have, made it more difficult to do that. Maybe, for example, going out on your own sometimes in nature, right, can be scary, or if you've had an experience that wasn't supportive, that can be difficult. So yeah, definitely in those ways. And it's not, I guess I'm thinking more of like trauma, but in other ways too, like you could have nature that is connected to unpleasant memories. But I think what's important is that we find the parts of nature that we can do. So if that's, you can't go on a hike, that's okay, right? Maybe it's a walk, maybe whatever it is.
Eat outside.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And would you
Eat
say
lunch
that
outside,
like the general public does benefit from being outside in some form, or having some nature related activity? Like, because I feel like in general as a human, that's like part of our
Sure.
DNA.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if that's just like from the perspective of someone who obviously loves nature and can't really imagine not enjoying that. Yeah, so just say that's what you've observed.
Definitely. In general, I mean, nature is very healing. It's very, for lack of a better term, like it kind of brings us back to when we were like cave people, and we talk about that a little bit theoretically when we learn, when we learn about therapeutic modalities. But we're regulating our nervous system in different ways because our access, and our things around us are sometimes very overwhelming. So how do we get back to those basics, right? And how we used to just, right? It was hard, but we used to, be outside all the time and, pick berries, and there were animals and, at the basis. So the ways that we can kind of get back to that is actually, exactly, nature's our home. Yeah. And that's like a huge part of a few of the modalities, especially ones that work with clients who've experienced trauma. Grounding, and that is very, very good in nature. And that's like something that we normally work on a lot.
What are some of the things that, on a personal note, what do you just like to do? Do you have any favorite things you like to go outdoors, or places you like to go to?
Sure. Yes, when I have the time and space, I love to get out. I mean, I love to travel. I love to see new places. With that, a lot of that being nature. Love to camp. Camping is so great, and just waking up in nature is like such a different, it's just so, exactly, peaceful is a great word for it. Such a cool thing. So I love to get out and do those type of things. I think day to day, I love a good sunset. I don't know if that's too cliche, but for me, it's almost kind of healing to see the sun kind of go down. And
incredible sunsets this week.
Yes. Gorgeous.
Incredible.
Gorgeous. Yeah. And I love the colors, and it just helps me remember that everything that's around me is so much bigger than just me. And I think that's the biggest part of nature that really is, impactful to me, is that I'm rushing, I'm doing all my things, I'm getting to work, I'm, all those things. But to take a minute to think like, oh my gosh, there's a whole world out there, I think, and that could be nature and obviously everything else, but that helps me remember that everything's so much bigger than just me. So I love a sunset. I love the beach. I like walks. Those type of things.
I've heard that you like to kick a soccer ball around.
I do. I love soccer. That's super great. Love to watch it. Love to play it.
Well, I guess you should have mentioned also that you're Dutch. So.
That is true. Yep, in my DNA maybe.
Well, I'm going to wrap up with something that we ask everybody with Nature's Playbook, is that we always think of us being the app that pays it forward, because that's really what we want to do by giving great locations and the visuals, and also giving back to nature and giving our personal experiences. Like a best friend would tell you, this is, if you go to that place, you should do this, and I'll give you that insight, right? And those special insider tips or whatever might help you have a great experience. But what are some of the, is there any certain way that you kind of fall back on or that you like to go to pay it forward as far as with nature, or maybe it's giving advice, or maybe it's taking someone somewhere, or maybe it's, I don't know, beach cleanups, or what do you like to do
Sure.
in that way?
I was thinking about this question a little bit and how to relate it to mental health and how we can pay it forward in nature that in a way also supports someone's mental health. And I think things like beach cleanups and making sure that we're taking care of nature is huge, obviously. I think that's always a great thing to do if you have the time and space for it. I think that's huge. We're protecting our earth and we're protecting things that will hopefully be around for a while, and that bring us joy. So I think that's huge. But in regards to the mental health, and I can, I guess, speak from personal experience, maybe I should be doing this more. But I think that it's super important in ways to pay it forward is to help other people have access to it, in terms of maybe taking something off someone's plate so that they can go on that walk. Or, maybe I'll watch the kids for an hour, you go do XYZ to kind of bring that back. And I think that obviously, like I'm saying, I think I could do that even more. And I think there's always room for improvement, in the ways we support each other in accessing nature. I think it's great to call up that friend and say, maybe if we've had a friend who's had a difficult week, hey, let's go out, let's go for a walk, right? I brought coffee, something like that. But I think that even more than that, it's nice to just be like, okay, hey, I've heard you had a difficult week. I brought dinner. Do you want to eat it together outside, or do you want to have your own time and I'll, hang at home with the kids or whatever it is? Some way to pay it forward so that people you can take something off their place, that they have access to those things that they feel maybe overwhelmed to access.
That's a great answer, and something for, to give me a thought of like, oh, who can I do that for? I already want to do it.
I know, I need to do it more.
Also, I have heard that the best way to delay or combat Alzheimer's is to go on a long walk with a friend. Basically have a chat with a friend, and then also the exercise. Apparently that's better than doing mental games and all that. Yeah, well, according to
Everybody
Sandra
grab your
Gupta.
Go outside for a walk.
Yeah.
But yeah, apparently that's
definitely.
the best thing that you do.
It's I think the combination of connection with others and being outside,
and the exercise.
exactly, is huge. And I know they're doing a lot of studies, especially like you said, in terms of Alzheimer's or dementia and memory and those type of things.
Memory.
Yeah, our connection to other humans is just so basic and something that we miss out on sometimes in the blur of our day. And then connecting with humans in nature is even better.
Yeah, it's just cherry on top.
Yep, cherry on top.
Cherry on top for sure. Well, thank you so much, Vivian.
You're welcome.
So insightful, and I can't wait for others to hear about our conversation and give it some thought, and hopefully, it can help them.
Yeah.
Or someone that they care about. So
definitely hope it was helpful. Thanks for having me.
All right.